Sportsman.
Hello, sportsmen. This being the week of Big Buck Night is a time that we should talk a little bit about antler growth in white-tailed deer. There are a lot of misconceptions about the antlers on deer, what significance they have in the deer world, whether a deer grows a point each year, exactly what factors influence the size of antlers that a buck might grow. We'll cover a lot of these subjects in the next half hour, so stay tuned. I'm Fred Trost, and you're watching The Practical Sportsman. White-tailed deer, the #1 big game animal in North America. It produces more wild meat for the table than any other species of game because it's a large animal and it's extremely plentiful. But whitetails are not easy animals to hunt. They're nervous creatures. They have highly developed senses, and they like to keep a distance between them and anything that looks or sounds or smells like a predator. That's why they take a few bites of food and then look around. Big bucks have a typical big buck walk. They bob their head as if it's a great pain to take a step. When he stops, you're going to see him chew his cud. This is food he horsed down earlier and later spends hours re-chewing when he can watch for predators. The buck is the one that the hunters have traditionally been after for several reasons. First of all, bucks are generally bigger, more meat. Secondly, in the years when deer were in short supply, wildlife managers restricted deer hunting to bucks only because taking the males from the herd did not have any effect on next year's reproduction. An active buck in his prime will mate with a number of does in the fall, 10, maybe 20, or even more. That means that most of the smaller bucks simply aren't needed. The big ones take care of next year's fawn crop. Naturally, with hunters harvesting more bucks than does during a year, there are less bucks than does in the woods. But there are far more bucks and far more deer than hunters ever see. And these deer aren't usually hiding back in the boondocks either. Most of them hide right under our noses. These deer are standing because they're in the 5-acre range pens at the Houghton Lake Deer Research Station, a great place for us to study deer with our cameras. Whitetails take enormous strides when they run, often 20 feet apart. How high can they leap? 8 or 9 feet with ease. In this grass, I suspect they're leaping so they can see better. Does and fawns have been seen jumping between strands of barbed wire that were a foot apart at a dead run without touching either wire. And how fast do whitetails run? Usually 20 to 25 miles an hour, but they can reach speeds up to 40 miles an hour. The size of deer is often a fooler. At a distance, they look larger than they really are. Now, this one here weighs 223 pounds as he stands. Not an unusual weight for a southern Michigan buck, 4.5 years old. 1.5-year-olds average between 120 and 150 pounds on the hoof. That yields about 30 to 35 pounds of boneless, trimmed, pure meat. This buck here is a little bony. Not the best buck to take if you're a meat hunter. Set your sights on a heavier deer, one with a little fat over the ribs. It's an old saying, though, that you can't eat the antlers. But antlers are still an attraction to hunters. The bigger the better, a lot of people feel. Now this buck, for some reason, hasn't rubbed the velvet off his antlers yet. It's peeling off, but evidently he hasn't been rubbing enough. He's also a shy buck, staying away from the rest of the herd as much as possible. Maybe the velvet is still sensitive for some reason, but this buck is a little behind in his antler development. Speaking of comparative development, in these pens at Houghton Lake are 1.5-year-old bucks that the DNR is using to study antler development. Now, despite the fact that they eat the same food and are exactly the same age, this buck has long single spikes, while his pen mate has a nice-looking 6-point rack. There's no truth to the tale that points on a buck's antlers can be used to count its age. All these deer are 1.5-year-old. Many have fork horns, little 4-point racks. And one fast developer even has an 8-point rack. Now that's in his first year of antler growth. Food can influence antler size, but primarily it's genetics. The offspring of deer with big racks tend to grow big racks too. And as you might guess, big racked bucks get more respect from the rest of the deer. Watch the smaller deer scoot when this big buck moves. When he puts his headgear down and walks through a crowd, they open up a path. That's the law of the jungle with big bucks. This buck probably bumped or injured the short side of his rack some way when they were in the velvet. That's usually what causes abnormal antlers. Now, genetics is a major factor in antler size along with nutrition, but just how much a high-protein diet affects antlers in one season isn't really known. The DNR is studying that question with this group of deer right here. Antlers are the fastest-growing bone in the animal world. And they are actually bones, but they're not like the bones inside an animal's body because they're solid. Antlers have no hollow center with marrow. In the wild, bucks this size and this age probably wouldn't see much breeding this year. Well, actually, now they would see it, but they wouldn't be doing it themselves. The 3- and 4-year-olds have most of the action, but there's a chance that this youngster, with his highly developed rack, would do his share of breeding too. Mother Nature puts the biggest racks on the healthiest, strongest bucks. They're the ones that win the battles for the does, and their genes are passed on to future generations of deer. White-tailed deer are fascinating to study. They're the most wary of our big game animals, and this season there will be plenty taken by hunters and many more for hunters to watch during their days in the deer blinds. People love to watch deer. They like to see them bound in the wild, and they also love to see the antlers on a deer, whether they're in the wild or whether they're in our museum here at the Practical Sportsman Museum. The antler displays in the deer draw a big crowd. This one in particular, this is Jose, a deer that was a pet of the Pittman family down in Brooklyn for almost 16 years. Jose, during his lifetime as a household pet, grew 15 sets of racks, and Doris Pittman has loaned us all of these racks to put on display here at the museum. This rack that Jose is wearing right here was his 6.5-year-old rack. Taxidermist Ray Dawson says that was his best rack that he grew in all of his years. As he got older and older, the racks got a little more gnarled. We do have a photo here of Lou Pittman, who unfortunately passed away last year. But Doris has sent this picture to be on display with Jose. It's something you can see at the museum and see the evolution of the antlers on white-tailed deer. Now, Fred Barron was at our Hunting Awards banquet. I think he has come the furthest that anybody has ever driven for any of our banquets. You came from where?
Sherwood Park, Alberta, Canada.
Alberta, that's right by Edmonton.
That's correct.
Which is how long a drive?
It took us 36 hours.
Wow.
Which is about 1,978 miles or slightly more.
Good grief. I tell you, this man holds the record for the longest drive to a banquet, and you've have got some tales to tell. Of course, you came to the museum before.
We came early in October this year, and that is the reason I came back.
We had such a good time chatting together then.
Right.
And he came back for the banquet, but let me just show you a little history of some of Fred's hunts up in Alberta. This right here, this picture is of a moose you got back in the 70s?
That's correct. 1976, October 1st.
Wow, that looks like a dandy moose.
It dressed out, meat weight, less the hide, 660 pounds.
Wow, that's a big one. And then
this one here was a 7.5-year-old.
Well, that's a trophy enough.
Yeah.
Get a load of this. This is a whitetail?
That's a whitetail.
Man, that is extraordinary. How many points did this have?
That one had 18, 9 on each side. There were 2 drop points going straight out on either side.
What a huge deer. Now, this year, you have gotten 2 deer that qualify. And of course, you realize that we do accept trophies from anywhere in North America. Take a look at these 2. What do we have here? What are you holding on this side, the one with the tall tines?
The tall tines is the mule deer buck I got on November 13th.
And how tall were those tines?
The tines are 14 inches.
Oh, good grief. What a deer. A mule deer that had, what is that, 3 on each side?
3 on each side, right.
But what tines? And then this is the whitetail you got the week
3
earlier.
plus, well, it's officially 3 on each side, plus the
brow tines?
brow tines, which they don't count.
But here we have the whitetail that you got.
Yes.
How did that measure?
He measured 18 and 5/8, I believe.
On the
That's
spread.
after the shrinkage of the first month, on the spread. And 5 points on one side and 4 on the other. Now, he was a bonus on the mule deer hunt.
I know, you didn't expect to see a
I
whitetail.
didn't expect to see a whitetail on the hills.
Now, the way you score them up in Canada, what do you call that if it's 5 on one side, 4 on the other? We'd call it a 9-point.
Right, I just call him a 4-point.
A 4-point. So you not only take the one side, but you take the smaller side?
Right.
Ooh, couldn't live with that system. No. Holy cow. But this, let's just take this one picture here. I want to ask, this is the territory that you took this whitetail?
That's correct.
Up in Alberta?
That's part of the Badlands in Alberta. Now, Dinosaur Park is just up the river a couple miles from my brother-in-law's ranch, which this was taken on.
Doesn't look like there'd be any territory up in here where deer would stay.
It's just a few little hills and plateaus. And there is no trees except within the deep parts of the valleys there. In the draws.
In these valleys, sometimes
Right.
you'll find them. So where do you hunt the whitetail?
Just behind the deer here is the river. And along the river there's some trees, and they hide in there.
What are the most popular rifles that people use out there? Use long range?
They use everything. 308 is one of the popular. And 30-06.
Now, why was it that you didn't bring the antler, the heads with you when you came
I
from Alberta?
didn't look into permits until just about the last day because I wasn't sure I was going to come. The opportunity was there,
But there's a big deal in taking things like that back and forth
but not a
across
big
the
deal.
border?
It's just timing
And paperwork,
and paperwork.
things like that.
Right. And what part that turned me off on it was that they told me I'd have to get a permit from the Michigan Game Department to bring it back.
To bring it back.
So if I was leaving on a Sunday, I may not have been able to get that permit.
Well, let's just take a look at one last newspaper clipping that was from 2 years ago. This one from up in Alberta. This rack, I guess they're still disputing the scoring system, but it's in contention for the world record whitetail.
That's correct.
How many points is this one? Do you recall?
I don't recall.
It's
I'll have to read the article again.
Yeah, I think it's something like, we'll put it up on the screen here, whatever it says on there. What a colossal rack. How far was this taken from the area that you hunt?
That was taken probably 50 miles south of Edmonton.
Wow. I tell you, that's something else. It's really great to have people like Fred Barron come to the banquet and share some of these experiences, some of the territory, some of the deer they get. Unbelievable to me. I mean, that 7-point I got may have been my buck of a lifetime, and this is just everyday stuff for you almost.
Yes, because I wasn't going to mount that one. I have one from Saskatchewan that is larger than that.
Well, I really enjoyed talking with Fred Barron from Sherwood Park, Alberta. Came all the way down here to visit the museum and to come to our banquet. Well, here's a picture of that buck that he got back in 1979 or 1980, an 18-point buck. I mean, that is horrendous. That is a buck of a lifetime. That's apparently the size of the bucks they grow up there, because this year, November 22nd, Fred called me on the phone and says, I got another big one. 12-point buck, 28 3/4 inch spread, 12-inch tines. That's a whitetail from Alberta, Canada, 20 minutes from where Fred lives. Some people have all the luck. The 1994 Big Buck Night featured the largest array of the largest racks I've ever seen on a Big Buck Night. So many racks that we didn't have time to hear any of the trophy tales. Here are the hints. We got sour cream, lettuce, tomato. What could this be for? Well, here it is. Betsy Pollard Rouse venison burritos. Almost didn't get these here on the show because this is a highly guarded recipe. Is that true, Betsy?
I'm still not sure I'm going to give it to you.
Well, you're going to have a lot of people to contend with here if you don't. Now, this looks sort of like enchiladas at this point in this casserole dish, but let's take a look at what's in here. Ooh, lots of meat. Lots of it. What, of course, is this ground venison? Or?
No, it's I take venison steaks or chops and cut them into cubes and then cook them overnight in a slow cooker with all the ingredients,
so
so
they're
it kind
pre-cooked.
of cooks it in.
Now, these tortillas were probably store-bought
Right.
tortillas.
Yes.
And cheese is, I would guess, cheddar.
Yep. And there's some refried beans in there.
Oh, okay. Refried beans. And the green stuff.
Green chilies.
So is this going to be a little bit hot? Or what?
A little bit. Depending on how much salsa you use, it'll get hotter. The actual meat is, I'd say, mild.
Mild, okay. Well, I'm going to put this on. I sure like the looks of this. Are you gonna dip some out of there, Ron?
Sure am. I'm gonna miss out on this.
Should I? I'm just gonna try some here before
Okay.
anything is added to it. Now you have some salsa here. You want to
Right.
open that up?
Sure.
It says salsa 93. You even got your own labels on it.
Yeah. It's Whoa Baby salsa.
Oh, I like the way the tortillas cook up.
And they kind of get soft and
And I like
tastes
the
good.
venison meat that's in the chunks. Good texture. It hasn't blown any hair off the top of my head, though. Boy, it's good. Very good. Now, what do you suggest I put on it?
I think put a little lettuce and tomatoes right on top, and then a spoonful of sour cream, and then a little bit of the salsa on top of that.
The salsa is your homemade salsa.
Right.
Is this any special secret recipe?
No, just a recipe I guess I've kind of put together. You know, uses some jalapeno peppers or hotter and
How much?
tomatoes. And
How am I doing here?
that's probably good. Yeah, that'll get
Okay. That'll get me. Well, the venison, you cook this with venison, but you probably also do it with beef?
you. I never have.
Haven't you?
No, I don't. I like venison because it's lower fat. We don't use very
Mm-hmm.
much beef.
Boy, this is tasty. This is very tasty.
What's nice about this meal is you can make this in advance and freeze it and then throw it in the oven and cook it or whatever.
You mean you freeze it before you cook it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Blow it up and
I
freeze it?
cook the meat and then I wrap it up and assemble the whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
and then freeze it that way, and then you just thaw it and bake it for half an hour.
But you say low fat. But you got cheese, sour cream.
Well,
Who are you trying
you know,
to kid?
You know, it's kind of like drinking light beer. You just, you know,
Yeah. Well, that's it. This is good for your conscience. And, of course, you can adjust the heat. This is very good salsa, too. Oh, you've got to love early winter with a snowfall. It isn't too cold yet. It's gorgeous out. Man, we're going to be ice fishing pretty soon. Whatever you do, get outdoors if you can. Enjoy this weather. It's a great place to be. See you next week.